Okay, how are we? Can you hear me now?
I can still hear you just fine.
I can see him saying that he can hear me just fine, which is awesome, but I don't want to hear myself. All right, so control room.
I'm going to skip right now.
Make sure you have the volume turned on.
Yeah, the volume is on. The volume is up fully.
The goal of it is this pushes
Let's
this
see.
up. This, what
We
can go wrong,
got,
this can be
yeah,
broken.
no, we have.
I forgot.
His microphone turned on.
Is your microphone turned on? I mean, he's using his phone. I think it's the same problem that we had when he was in the other room. And
to really fix it, it was just, it fixed itself.
communications. Default.
It didn't do exactly what I wanted to do, but it worked. But I need to make
Okay, anything there? Can you talk a little bit, Dale? Nothing?
Lips are moving, but no one's...
Yep. All right.
Okay, there.
Oh,
Now
there we
I'm
go.
here.
Yes, there we go. All right, so we got it. All right, so let's have everybody gather around, please, this way, and we can we can hook you up to the projector over here. So there we go. That way we're not seeing myself so much. And we're going to put you on the projector so we can see you on big screen as well, and then we're just going to be looking at ourselves on small screen. So thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you. Just go ahead and grab a chair. Dale was, if you remember, back to our kickoff party in September, Dale was the one who did those awesome 3D printed robots. Among other things, he's also the FTC Volunteer of the Year. So thanks so much for joining us, Dale.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's been an interesting year to say the least, and I know which teams are represented there now.
Right now, Bazingabots, Kilobots,
Everybody's represented.
Binary and Chaos.
Yes.
And certainly, I have to thank the Bazinga bots to bringing it to my attention about how bad ESD could be. That made for an interesting twist this year, because I believed what first had to say that it wasn't much of a problem until they showed me otherwise. And some of the interesting things that happened there were, as I was reporting this back to them, their responses were, "Oh yeah, well we're kind of seeing that too." Well, thanks for telling me. So there are still many people out there that don't believe ESD is a problem, and I encounter that in quite a few places with some rather high-placed volunteers from time to time. An example of that is I was getting training in St. Louis for field inspection, since I was a CSA back there this year, and they said they wanted it to be a leisurely pace for everybody, and it says, "Oh, well, I could take some measurements and talk to teams about what kind of ESD problems they're having." And the response came back, "Absolutely no measurements, and ESD is not a problem." So anyway, so thanks to the Bazinga bots for getting me tuned into that. That made an interesting rest of the season for me.
You're welcome. This is a two-way conversation here.
Yes.
So I guess I'm open to talking to just about anything. And as Kathy put out to teams that were moving on to St. Louis, I am no longer in a judging role at the higher levels, so that actually frees me up to talk about many things that I would have had to refrain from before. So whatever you guys want to talk about, hey, I'm willing to talk about it. And if it's something that I just can't, I'll tell you I can't.
Well, I think what we were hoping was, I know you talked about your day in the life of a judge.
Okay, if you want me to get started on that, I can do that.
Yeah.
I jotted down just a few notes to make sure I hit all the items going through it. And it turned out it was about 3 pages long, and I'd never taken any notes. I've just kind of winged the thing before, but. And even in some of the things that I'm willing to talk about, I know in the official statement of things, people would probably say that I shouldn't even share this kind of information, but it's general in nature, so I'm going to anyway. What are they? They can't fire me twice. So I guess going back to some of the early days when all of this was set up, was that there weren't very many teams that did very much work. If you think along the award lines, especially outreach type activities and stuff like that. So the process that goes on, you could easily correlate that well, probably consistency from tournament to tournament if there would have been those, to those that did the most got the award. But things have evolved along since then, whereas many teams do so many different things that it's no longer that simple. And the fact is, I know the things that we did that we used to get called out for was great and superb and all that stuff wouldn't even get a second look today. Teams do that much more work, especially in outreach and stuff. So the process hasn't changed very much since the early days. But but the teams, the work they've done, so it's much harder. Also, judges are not associated with any teams. Generally, they don't know in any great detail what teams go through in a season, and that's kind of by design. For example, one of the reasons that I'm no longer involved in judging was for that various reason. Here I was facilitating the control award. I used to judge it until there were too many teams I knew that I couldn't judge. Facilitate that and set up all the process. And they also know that I spend a lot of time talking to teams throughout the season. And it just so happens that Oregon teams tend to judge extremely well when they go out of state. So there was kind of a possible perceptions of conflicts of interest going on there, and they certainly want to avoid all of that, and it all makes sense. So so what that gives you is judges that are just not as familiar with teams and the process and what they go through. They're seeing things in a much colder situation. Usually they, the judges, for the things they're judging, they have some form of skill or expertise that will allow them to differentiate teams. Typically, they won't assign a non-technical person to evaluate technical awards. And that makes sense because they really don't have the background to judge that. However, as I've been finding out more and more, there are many areas across the country that simply can't attract enough technical people, so they are relying on non-technical people to do judging for technical awards. Now, fortunately for the higher level tournaments, that's not the case, but that turns out to be in many areas a real difficulty. So consequently, they've designed the process or tweaked that to kind of dumb it down so anybody can go in and hopefully do a reasonable assessment of teams. Also, judges receive very limited training beforehand. I think Oregon does about the best of doing training, advanced training and stuff for judges of anybody. But there's still a high variability in Oregon. Let's face it. Those teams have been around for a while, and they look at results from one tournament to the next, and it seems like the outcomes tend to be random, at least more random than what you'd expect. So that kind of leaves a lot to be desired on how you look at that. The one important thing to remember is that there are no secrets about what the judges do or anything like that. They work from exactly the same award guidelines that you guys have in the game manual. verbatim the same things. There's no other, secret sauce or anything that gets mixed into that they use for their evaluations. It's basically their subjective experience and what they see along the day. Now, so getting into what actually goes on the day, the judges will usually show up early in the morning, and they'll have, a quick meeting, hopefully grab a bite of breakfast or something like that. And then they're broke down into judging panels. And then they go prepare their judging room. And in many cases, these judges that they're be partnered with have never even met each other before. And so when it comes to interviewing teams and things like that, they're actually trying to figure out how they're going to work together at the same time they're conducting interviews. The one good thing along those lines is, at least in Oregon, they split the technical and non-technical stuff into separate sessions. And that gives a lot more face time with judges to teams. That's really a good thing, because that's probably one of the real weaknesses that go on in the judging is the amount of face time you get. That's usually the most beneficial, and that's the hardest to come by. So when judges have sort of entered their room and they get set up, and then the teams start flowing in, and that is based on the clock. Typically, every 20 minutes you're going to see a new team, whether you're ready for them or not. And things have to stay on schedule. So basically, you got a 10-minute interview, 5 minutes to briefly look through the engineering notebook, and then 5 minutes to write up your evaluation and kind of do a ranking on what you've seen so far. When you think about it, you sort of say, well, 5 minutes, that should be enough. But when you're in there and you're looking through for all these different awards on teams, that is just almost no time at all. It goes by so very, very fast. And if you kind of blink or you sneeze or you need a quick bathroom break, it's very easy to fall behind. And the next team's coming in right on cue. You can't delay. You can't make them wait. And what that turns out is it becomes very fatiguing as a judge. They typically only have judges see, 8, maybe 9 teams. And that's kind of a minimum of 3 hours straight. And usually they give us one break in the middle of about 20 minutes. So you can just imagine if you're sitting there trying to do something, taking a test or whatever you do for 3 hours straight, and how difficult that can be. To go along with that, one of the things that at least most judges want to do is when the teams come in, they want to be very engaging with the teams. That usually means eye contact, looking at what the team's pointing to if they're going through the robot. You're listening to them. You're basically focusing on everything the teams have to say. You also need to be able to take notes while you're doing that. And for most people, if you're facing with that kind of focus and seeing what teams are doing, it's very, very hard to take good notes. And it turns out at the end of the day, it's your notes that you have to rely on most. And that's the hardest thing to get right. Also, since you're trying to engage teams and you're trying to get through as much information as possible, just think about that. If your attention drifts a little bit or you yawn, you can certainly miss some key points. And, those are inevitable things. So as a team coming in there, you guys should be fresh, hopefully. And you want to be looking for those kinds of cues to make sure that by the time you walk out, that you've been able to convey the most important things you've done. At the end of that judging session, the judges are going to pick the top 3 teams for each award, and they usually try to come up with just one phrase, a very short, cryptic phrase, as to why, these teams should be considered further for that award. Now, that information gets written out on a whiteboard, and a lot of times at this point, judges are using the notes they've taken, those quality notes that there's never enough time for. And you can really sell them after you've gone through several teams, even though teams really left a really very positive impression on you. to kind of remember them. I mean, as a case in point, I remember interviewing one team, and they were a very good team. It was very engaging. It was a very exciting interview, and they hadn't even got out the door, and I realized that I totally forgot everything that they had told me. Fortunately, I looked at my partner. I go, now what was it they did? And he fired back, a couple of key things and stuff, and that jogged my memory, so I could finish getting my notes and everything adjusted before I lost it again. But those are the things that happen as you start getting tired and fatigued. Judges then go into their first deliberation round, and they list out those candidates with that phrase, and they talk about them briefly, again, relying on the notes. Then the judging panels are reformed along award lines, and so again, you're probably having to figure out how to work with another brand new partner throughout the rest of the day. And that's where you get to go back out and visit the teams again and do a more exhaustive effort to find the details for the individual awards. And then at the second deliberation, you rank the teams for each award. And, certainly when multiple teams do a lot of work, it becomes very difficult to rank them because the awards are very generally written, and teams usually follow their own path, and many ways and things you do will qualify you for an award. So it becomes a very much apples and oranges kind of comparison. Judges have to be able to just kind of make those kinds of decisions. So I guess, that at that point, at the end of the day, judges are just flat fatigued. You're tired, you're ready to go home, and you're just so glad to get the award scripts written, because then you're done. So I think what teams need to understand is that judging is very subjective. A very good way to think of it is if you have a product to sell, and that's going to be your robot and yourselves, all the things you've done. So as much as judges may like your product, they only get to buy one. And that's very similar to various companies going out to, bidding on contracts and stuff. There's only going to be one contract issued, and you want them to pick you to do it. So you have to keep that in mind. So the process now is not only about the work you've done, but it's how well you sell it. And one of the things that I kind of found while I was talking to various people at the highest levels at first this year in St. Louis, and that is exactly how they view it as well. So they're very comfortable with the fact that, quite often, if you've done a lot of things, and a lot of teams have done a lot of things, it's the best salesmen that are likely to get selected. So I think, and I'm certainly not an expert in any of this, so if you're looking to do things with judging, you want to look at techniques for effective selling. I don't know if you have any classes or things like that in schools, like marketing classes or business type classes. There are techniques there that you might want to look at and apply. Certainly one of the important things is how you certainly present yourself. I remember many years ago while I was still coaching, it was the year before the FLL team, the Pig Mice, won the World Championship at FLL. And they got up on stage at a qualifying tournament. And the thing that stuck out in my mind, because we knew the team quite well beforehand, was they had this presence on stage. You immediately liked them. You fell in love with them before they did anything. So those are the kinds of things to keep in mind. If you walk through the door and the judges are already predisposed to liking you, you now can launch right into what you are, and you've saved several minutes or so in getting them comfortable with you if they just are naturally. I was so impressed with the way that they were. that, and I realized that certainly the team I was coaching, they weren't anything like that at all, and I didn't even know how to make them that way. So that's certainly one of the things that goes to your dress, your mannerisms, your speech patterns, whatever. Another thing to do is kind of think of situations when people are trying to sell you something, and how do you feel about that? How did you feel about them, about their approach and stuff? So this is very much the same thing. Some other things to really consider is what can you do to make life easier for the judges? And what kind of difficulties do you see that judges may have? And how can you help them work around that? Certainly, again, one of the biggest things that I've always found is sort of like keeping accurate notes and staying focused on what I need to stay focused on there. I think a good example was a few years ago with the nanites. I don't know if you guys have been around long enough. You might remember them. And after I had a talk with them, they went into the Super West Regionals, and one of the kids noticed that one of the judges was just yawning. They had an interview late in the day. And he says he rather a little bit louder than normal just made a comment like, "Are we ready to go?" and snapped the judge out of it. And at that point, they knew they had the judge's total attention, and they just launched into their stuff. Little things like that to watch for. So maybe, your coaches, maybe other teachers and stuff at school can kind of help you guys look at how you're going to sell. But selling yourself is clearly a really important thing, and it's worth spending some time understanding effective ways to do that. And I think that just kind of wraps up, I guess, the key things I've got to say. So does anybody have any burning questions?
We were told by our coach that there was new technology or something like that.
What about the new technology?
Can you focus a little bit on judging before we get to that?
Okay.
So
Never mind.
let's
Never mind. Sorry.
So
Yeah, certainly.
questions about judging, folks. What questions do we have?
So how do you go about like making your team more comfortable before entering the room? Because I know it's like it gets really nervous and stuff like that. Is there any tips or anything we could do to make ourselves more comfortable before entering the room?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know how to get rid of the butterflies if I'm really anxious. One thing, though, that you need to be aware of is that, at least in the training and stuff that goes along with that, the judges are they're kind of looking to make teams comfortable. They want you to feel comfortable when you come into the room. So, now I think teams doing more of a presentation style thing up front to get things rolling is more in favor where it used to be. But one of the things that I would always do, especially if a team looked nervous, is I would make, whatever comment came into my head or something like that, just to get a conversation rolling that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the robot or what have you, just to get some dialogue going. So the judges want you to be comfortable, and they're not looking to make you nervous. So any nerves and stuff like that kind of comes from within. We really try to be a very friendly audience to you guys. Other than that, I guess you would, I think it's probably different for most people as to how they get themselves relaxed. I don't have any wonderful words of wisdom on that.
Also, to add on to that, is it better to be like kind of straightforward and just jump into talking about your robot, or to try to crack jokes and be pretty much like a comedian? Or we are a comedic group, so.
Well, that's a good one. If you guys can pull it off, certainly very lighthearted type things is very helpful, and that will actually set a relaxing tone. If it's clear that you guys aren't overly serious about this, but you're well focused, if that's who you are, that can sell pretty well. you probably being cracking too many jokes. That would be depend a lot on perhaps the judges you have, and since you don't necessarily know them ahead of time, that could be a risky proposition to crack too many jokes.
Yeah.
But again, that's reading people. If you get there are a few judges out there that are total clowns themselves, given half a chance, and they might start throwing it back at you. And if it's working for you, go for it. Just make sure you get the information covered that you really want to. Again, it's a way to how do you get them to remember you?
Exactly.
And if jokes are working for you, then don't screw with success. But again, I remember one year as an FLL team in our project, we had a couple of kids on the team that liked to clown around a lot. And in their project presentation, they built in some jokes and stuff like that, and they were appropriate for the project. But they walked in, and what they had was all foreign people were judges, and they didn't get the jokes.
Oh.
So it just bombed on them.
So, well, my team was at Super Regionals. We came up with an idea that we thought would be fun, but we weren't sure if it would be appropriate. So our idea was, after a few of us came in doing the robot rumble and everything, that one of us would be outside with the robot and then be like, oh, we forgot the robot, and then that person come in and say Bazinga.
I guess one of the things that I tell a lot of people, if you want to get to the top, you have to be willing to take risks. And if they pay off, they're going to really help. But again, they're risks, and they can go both ways. It's, you guys are kind of clowns, so you might be able to pull that one off. One of the things that judges really like to see is teams being themselves. And it's there is no set recipe for how to be successful in there. And so the things you're talking about and trying and thinking, they're all good. It's all good stuff to talk about.
Thank you.
That was the only two questions I had.
So what would you recommend for a team that is usually just straightforward and serious all the time?
I guess, if you're a straightforward, serious team, you certainly don't want to try comedy in your routine. Again, if that's who you are, that's who you want to convey. And I guess in that case, you might be looking at ways that, how do you communicate all the serious, in your own way, the stuff you want to convey? Are you a team that focuses a whole lot on excruciating detail and other things like that? I'm thinking in terms of engineering, maybe you carefully test and characterize all aspects of your robot or things like that. Those things that you probably excel at, if you're very serious, you really want to focus on selling that aspect well. I bring things up like, characterizing and testing your robot and stuff like that as an example that if you were a real serious team and you were really focused on engineering, that's probably something that can really set you apart from many other teams. Even at the national level, when I've looked through stuff at the World Championship, it's amazing how little characterization and or testing that teams do on the robot. Very few teams do very much of that. So if you think about, if you're very, very serious, if you're focused on detail, then some things like that can be real differentiators.
So, Dale, in terms of, you mentioned the judges having to rely so much on their notes for their interview and their presentation. Have you ever had teams, or what would you think about, somewhere within the notebook we have the section where we can specify that teams look to a certain point in the notebook. Could we have, how much on the edge would we basically say, look to us for getting this award on these pages?
Well, I think that is an excellent thing to do. One of the things I was striving to do that I had to be careful before about communicating with teams is for the control award, you have to submit for that. And what we were asking for on the submission form were all of those little things that would help make the job of the judge easy. And in there was a section of which you could provide links in the engineering notebook of all of the relevant information for the control award. My hope was that that once this got solidified for the control award, that people might realize that, hey, that could be useful for the other awards. Now, you're supposed to be giving judges a summary sheet for all of the awards and things like that, but that is a one-page summary sheet, if you've done very much, is just really not adequate to cover all the awards. So if you have links in there to other places that judges can look quickly, that's very helpful. Now, normally that sits in the engineering notebook, and if you're a team that's done a lot, sometimes there's competition between the different judging groups for your engineering notebook, just to look up what they want. The nice thing about the submission form for the control award is that the judges had the copy right in front of them with all of those pointers and links to everything. And then appended on the back of that, which some teams did, was at least a detailed summary of all of the relevant stuff. Maybe it was like 7, 8, 10-page summary some teams did. So that was always right in front of you as a judge. So you had all these submission forms, and then those teams that give you extra information, that was really appreciated. So if you were looking to maybe extend that, and other teams have, they kind of did it on their own for each of the awards, and they had like almost a separate submission form for every award. I don't know how much judges would look to use that, because it would be a surprise and they wouldn't necessarily know what to do about it. But if it were a separate document, short document there that was available to them, it would help alleviate some of that congestion for the engineering notebook. And I did have a case. Turns out it was a Portland area team. They're no longer they're no longer competing, so I guess I can share this. Is they were asking me for guidance on the engineering notebook. They had one kid on there that was just focused on the notebook, and so I went over to their house. They were having a meeting, and I was off in a room with the coach and this kid, and the coach had to go off and do a business call. So this kid was just asking me all these questions that I was out laying everything out. And that was before the state tournament when I could still talk to teams. And then afterwards, we were at Super West and they were there. And I walked into the judging room, and the person who was reviewing the engineering notebook, she starts telling, we had this one team that did all these things, blah, 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 this and that and the other thing, and all of these summary sheets for all the different awards loosely packed into the notebook. It was great. And I'm thinking, boy, that sounds familiar. And I go look at the notebook. Yep, it was the kid I talked to. So he took all of that and did all of that. Well, it attracted the attention of the judge for the engineering notebook, which was great because of the thoroughness of the documentation and the care provided. unfortunately, all these loose leaf things that were there for the individual judges to use were still in the notebook. So I'm not sure if it was effective for the judges or not, but it was very well presented. And again, this is one of those things as well. It's a lot of work, and maybe it doesn't get looked at, but it's a way to communicate and perhaps get additional information about you to the judges that's easy to see. I think at this point, there are no formats or formalities for that if you want to push ahead, you're going to have to take risks. In this case, the risk is the effort it takes to do all that with the possibility that it will get ignored. I think an important thing to remember is that if you provide additional information and things like that, that's not viewed as a penalty or anything from the judging aspects. So it's anything you do can be viewed as a plus, but if it is outside the norm, the chances there's a chance that it will not be viewed by the judges. Actually, in that particular case, to actually help your case along, that during the interview, maybe you call out anything else you do in addition, specifically draw the judge's attention to that, and if they're loose leaf things that they can kind of take with them, indicate that they're free to pull them out and use them however they see fit. Now, if somebody were to do that to me, and again, I look at things one way and I appreciate certain things, whereas every judge is different. If somebody would point that out, I would quickly look at those sheets, probably if it was along the lines I was going to focus on in the interview, and see what kind of information is there. If I can quickly scan it in 2 or 3 seconds, and then I might refer back to that and not worry about taking so many detailed notes. If it's all written down for me, then I can just validate all that and say, that just saved me a ton of work. That's the sort of thing that would make me happy, but you'd probably have to call it out and get my attention to that so that I knew it was there.
So would you recommend having us put in another section saying why we would be good for this award?
That can't hurt. And I want to, I have to sort of, fall back. I can't necessarily recommend anything because unless I know it's going to get used by the judges, it's a hard thing to say. It's anything you do that will call attention to the work you've done and in a format that's probably going to help the judges in general would be a good thing to do. And since there are no forms or anything that would be preferred or recommended, it's however you might view that would be a welcome sight. I know in a couple of cases in the past where teams started doing things. For example, the last year that I was coaching the team, I found out after we won the Think Award at the World Championship, and afterwards I found out, things that you're never supposed to hear about the judging room, is that one judge wanted to disqualify our notebook because we didn't follow the rigid format. And the thing that we didn't do is at that point in time, there was no separate section or no way to convey to the judges any outreach you did. The engineering notebook was just your engineering stuff. And so we put a separate tabbed section clearly labeled in our notebook that covered our outreach. And since that was not something that was in the guidelines, one judge actually wanted to disqualify our notebook. Well, fortunately, there was another judge that was equally vehement, saying, no, there's no way to present this. So the fact that showed up, it turned out that the following year, the rules were changed to allow that. And we kind of see that incrementally since then. So, if you guys come up with a really good way that might present things to help judges see you in a different light, it might become the standard after that. You never know.
Okay.
So back to judging. If the judges aren't given like any visual feedback to let us know whether like to be comedic or anything like that, is there anything we can do to like any like words or something that we should say to kind of get like feedback from them on how to act or how to present ourselves from then on?
Yeah, that is a very hot and difficult topic. First is very vehement about no feedback to teams. Now that was driven by a few judges and stuff that when teams came back to them is sort of like, well, you said this about this team and that about us. Why didn't we get the award over them? Which the feedback was not designed to address those issues. And these judges just didn't want to deal with that. And so they apparently were the most vocal set, and they went to first, and that was first guidelines. Oregon doesn't believe in that, and I know Kathy Sweeter was back there at the times they were having those discussions, and was vehemently opposed to all of that, but that was a battle she lost. Now, Oregon does give feedback this last year. They were doing it again, all except for the state tournament, and First knows about it. And First is not happy with Oregon doing that at all. Did you guys get feedback during your qualifiers and stuff? How was that received? Was it good feedback?
Yeah, it wasn't really very detailed, but it was good information to base the next season off of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually very hard, as busy judges are, to spend much time giving detailed feedback. It can really be hard, especially when the clock's ticking and the next team's coming in, because you have to kind of do that once while it's fresh in your mind. Oregon is very much in terms of we'd like to provide feedback, and as long as it's taken in the spirit it's given, I don't know how you would approach a judge outside of that to get that, because they're usually focused elsewhere and trying to pick out the teams for the award winners and stuff like that. So it will be hard for judges to, I guess, give you much realistic feedback. Anyway, it's I know that the cover sheet for the feedback I thought was very well written to give teams guidance on that. Like I say, First knew about that, and they are not at all happy with Oregon. So right now, just to give the feedback we're able to give, we're pushing the limits on what First is going to tolerate. I don't know how to change the picture at First. This year that I had a chance to talk to more people at the higher levels, I was quite often surprised at the way they operate versus the way we operate in Oregon. It's almost in an adversarial relationship, not only with the judging, but with things that go on in the field, refereeing, and everything like that. Whereas in Oregon, our whole attitude is, well, we're there to support the teams. We're going to follow the rules, and we have to keep tournaments moving. But along the way, we don't want teams to feel like they're shut out. If we have information and they're interested in that, we're very willing to share everything we know. But it's surprisingly, at other levels at First, that is not the case. So I guess I don't have a good answer to your question. And it's kind of a long-winded way of saying, as far as providing feedback, we're doing everything we can. We'd like to see more, but we feel the push coming from teams is this is a learning experience. We really want the feedback, and then on the other side of First, we're getting just the pressure from the opposite direction. If you guys have any good thoughts over time as to how we might proceed and even approach First or make changes, we're listening.
So is there a place we can go to like put that in? Like on the
There's basically, you can always send email to firsts. I think there's like the teams at first or whatever it is. You can send requests like that. There's always the forum, which usually stirs up all sorts of discussions whenever things like that are brought up, but seldom comes of it. Probably, I think if you have some good suggestions, it would be best to maybe send it to ORTOP, to Kathy, and she can route it to whoever is appropriate. ORTOP's likely to be your most sensitive audience for making quality changes. So that's probably the best place to start.
Any other questions on that?
Okay.
Is anyone judging questions?
Not really. I cleared most of my questions out.
Seems like they're out of judging questions. Do you want to take some general questions?
Sure, fire away.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we were told of a new technology that was coming out, or something like that.
Okay, the only things I know of, I'll briefly go down what I discovered in St. Louis. They had one of the co-founders from Modern Robotics. They also had a pit area there, or a booth set up in the pit area. The Modern Robotics guy said there's basically no mechanical changes to any of those components for next year. They're not planning on improving any ESD stuff because that would cost teams a lot of money. Read that, it was likely to cost Modern Robotics lots of money. There are the firmware updates where you have to send your modules in to get them all reflashed. That is something that I would recommend doing, even though in quantity it's like $8 a module. The biggest, that they've added a few features which they describe on the web page. I won't go into that here, but it does appear to fix the 35-second power cycle time, and that alone, at least from ORTOP's perspective, was worth the money, because we go to these outreach events, things get into funky states and you got to cycle power, and so that'll come back much faster. I mean, I did a little testing in the first modules we set back, and it looks like if I leave it off for 5 seconds, that's sufficient. I think maybe the new tech you're talking about might be, I forget the name of the company, but they're selling the new mechanical stuff through Andy Mark. So if you go to the Andy Mark webpage and you'll look for something on building materials, it'll be like some extruded parts. It's like the 80-20 stuff that people use a lot, except it's smaller dimensions and stuff, and they let you use more standard bolts and things like that to fasten it together, so that's cheaper. One of the things that the representative from that company said is they're not trying to make a boatload of money. They're trying to keep costs down. So, if that holds true, and I looked at the stuff, and it's sort of like, it looked a whole lot cheaper than the Tetrix components. So if you're familiar with the 80-20, you go look at that, and it's a very similar thing. It's not a complete build system or anything like that, but it's just different materials you can use. I've been looking on maybe buying a bunch of that just to see how well it works for, and maybe build a little sample robot out of that. Haven't done that yet. It looks like to get samplings of about all of the parts they currently have, enough to get started to build something small, is about $200. Just kind of a sampling of all of the stuff they put out. There may be a whole lot that that they still have left to add. It's just beginning. And Andy Mark has promised for the upcoming year that they're going to have lots of new stuff. And so I don't know what lots of new stuff means, whether they haven't, if that's just the new build system and a few other things that's already mostly there, or whether they got a whole bunch of new stuff coming down the line. So I guess it's, they did not elaborate on what some of their other new stuff would be other than that. there's a group continuing to develop the SDK for the Android phone. Hopefully, they say they're going to have the stuff documented by this fall, and that'll be wonderful because at least some documentation's better than none at all, which is what we've had to live with this year.
We've had a bit of a room that I custom made just for the stuff that we use daily for editing programs and stuff like that. But it would be really nice to have that.
So what about the custom stuff you guys made?
Oh, so like for the different like things that we use, like for lines of code and stuff, I kind of put up like a Google Doc with like different things on how you use that and examples for it and stuff for just stuff that I use on the daily for the programs that we have made. But it would be really nice once we get that full documentation on all the different things that we can do.
Oh, that would be absolutely wonderful. You know, the best help that they've been able to give is say, well, look at our sample programs. And
We just do it the entire time.
yeah, so that kind of sucks. I posed the question, and not too many teams necessarily care about this yet, but I asked the question if they were going to do any improvements on constant rate sampling, especially for your sensors and stuff like that. And the blank stares I got back from these expert panels that are doing this work kind of told me that no, they don't consider that an issue worth following because the Android phone doesn't support that, which is too bad. And so I immediately turned to Tom Ing, the engineer first, and I says, well, since no work's going on that, can we get Arduinos allowed so that we can easily do this? And then he launched into the company line about, well, they don't know how to select and pick in fairness to all and everything like that. So we're not getting Arduinos for next year either. Other than the new hardware materials that Andy Mark will be selling, mostly it's just a progression from where things were this year, is from all I can tell. Let's see, the first engineering, Tom Ing, he freely admits that ESD is a problem, not everybody else at first. Modern Robotics, their co-founder, this was a classic. Basically, he stated that ESD is just a fact of life and teams need to learn how to deal with it, even though they aren't going to do anything about it. While the people in the pit, in the booth in the pit area, they were just average people and fun to talk to. At least the co-founder for Modern Robotics, he never left me with the warm fuzzies. And if there was a way that I could get by without spending another dime with Modern Robotics, I'd do it. So I think that probably summarizes all of the stuff that I picked up there. Again, we're going to have the same kind of problems we had this year. At least we know how to address most of those. How to secure your USB cables, how to isolate your electronics from the chassis to minimize the chances of ESD. Oh, Andy Mark did say that they were going to perhaps do some study and change the stealth wheels. So if we need high traction tires for next year, maybe they'll, and they were even talking about just a different hub for the wheels, which is probably all that is needed. I remember talking to them about that at the Super West Regionals, and at least they're responsive because in essence, they were echoing the same kinds of things that I was talking about at Super West. So it sounds like the message was heard loud and clear.
Are there any suggestions that you would have for teams that want to continue working on things over the summer, like specific areas that would just general areas to work on?
I think, I was interesting because I was just talking to TNT when they were at the Mount Hood thing, and that same thing kind of came up in a sense. And if it's the off season, I think probably if you're going to spend time there, there's probably some things that are most interesting to you. And I would just, to keep it fun and light, I would say if there's something of interest to you, just go focus on it. Because anything you learn and the stuff you do, it's all good, whether it ends up getting used next year or not. It's just all good for building your knowledge base and your understanding about these things. Not knowing what's going on, my perceptions were like this year, doing control systems things for the control award was probably down from what it was in prior years for what teams do. So if you've got people that are interested in control, it's just wide open, the kinds of things that you can go about doing and the kinds of things you're going to have to work around. Again, now with the the new stuff in Andy Mark, you can buy all the new building materials now. If you want to experiment with different robot building styles, you can go look that stuff over. Just pick something and go have fun. One of the things that's been of interest to me, and I've started to focus on it, and I'm also looking for teams, this is more along the control lines, looking at using machine learning techniques, especially things like reinforcement learning for controlling robots. And so if there were somebody that was really interested in control and some of the things you can do from machine learning was of interest, you guys can contact me and I'll include you in the small circle of people I've been sharing what I know. To get started in things like this, it's really helpful, if you had a kind of a machine learning for dummies book or something. That doesn't exist yet, as far as I know. But if people are interested in looking along those lines, I can provide some additional feedback for that. I don't have anything concrete that it says, well, go here, undertake this task or that task. And because it should be really useful going forwards. I'm just too early in my explorations to do that. But I've already got some input from other teams that they're really excited about doing some of these things. And so I'm just in my own chaotic form of study, I've just been sharing anything I think that's relevant. Yeah, again, the most important thing is do the things that you have fun, that are fun.
Do you have any more questions?
I don't think so.
Thank you for the time.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Thanks for giving us a call and going over a few things with us. I don't think we really have any more questions than that.
Really?
Unless you don't.
Somebody's knocking.
Unless you
They have a question.
No.
All right, thanks, Dad. I think you've flooded them with information. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your day and meeting with us.
Got a lot of notes.
Yeah, these guys took a bunch of notes, so I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's kind of, now that I'm retired, it's kind of the thing I look forward to from time to time is just interacting with teams. The things one of the things that makes it enjoyable is, especially like BazingaBot's bringing problems up to me and things like that, that really makes it fun. It gives me something to look forward to and to get involved with. So I want you guys to know that I do appreciate all of the hard work you guys do and your efforts and stuff. And you guys really do set good examples at tournaments and stuff. That's very wonderful to see. And it's been really fun watching in the Gorge area how this whole program has developed over the last several years. It's really quite amazing the kind of things you guys have accomplished. I think individually as teams and collectively as a larger community. So for people like us that kind of get involved with teams, that's very rewarding to kind of see that kind of effort. So I need to thank you guys as well.
You want my guys? Energy.
All right,
Still trying to go through
all right,
it.
Dale. We'll have to try and do this again as the season goes on next year. I think this was really helpful. Some kids that were busy with some other sports and activities today, but yeah, I think we're gonna sign off. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right.